may be some things that I say in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, which is a very big worry to me, as I'm not normally past my first slide after 15 minutes, but I will do my best to stay to time. But I may say some things that you do find challenging. And indeed, if I can make one opening remark, it's that it's a great pleasure to be back here and be working again with the new council area, because as many know, my involvement in the City of Culture, small as it was, the economic bid process was one of the most rewarding processes I ever had in terms of trying to understand how the economic language can be motivating and inspiring rather than being seen, as was mentioned, can be seen in that kind of constricting language. But yet it's hugely important. Almost all of the things that we've talked about today require the taxpayer. We're going to have revenue for a lot of what we want to do. So our job in the Research Centre, we've been delighted that the Council has come on board as a sponsor, and we've been doing a small piece of work during the process here to help look at the economic impact of what success will look at. And I'm deliberately not going to give you forecasts from our outlooks about what we think business as usual will be for the local area, because it won't be the sort of thing that anyone in this room would be happy with an outcome. We are going to have to work hard. There are some economic challenges out there. We need to exceed our expectations in order to deliver for the generation that follows us. If we look at the economy today, this is for Northern Ireland, most of the indicators are moving in a positive direction. We've got a booming Irish economy on our doorstep. We've got rising house prices, improving car sale numbers, better employee job numbers, falling unemployment. Everything on the face of it seems rather rosy. In particular, the domestic economy has really started to perform as people get just a little bit richer, largely on the back of falling oil prices. So the conditions look rather more positive than they have done over the last 4 or 5 years. But that could lull us in. There are some real challenges afoot, not least government austerity that still remains with us, meaning we are going to have to be innovative and creative as we look to ways to find money and fund things, look more about what we can do, not what we can ask of others. We're also going to have to face a potential slowdown in that domestic market. So much of the recent job growth has been on the back of the domestic sectors, and there are high debt levels. There will be rising interest rates at some point, and they will come to choke off some of the growth unless we have those firms that are looking outward beyond our shores. The data there really shows two trends comparing Northern Ireland and the UK. The UK labour market is bigger than it was at the peak of the boom, pre the crash. The Northern Ireland labour market is not. It's on its way back, but it's still got some way to go. The recession was more damaging and the recovery has been slower for a number of reasons. Some of the UK's growth is demographic, huge numbers of in-migrants driving the job growth figures higher. We haven't seen the growth in Northern Ireland self-employed numbers as I expected we would, but it has been a phenomenon that has occurred in the UK, changing the dynamics for financial institutions of who to lend to, changing the dynamics of what it means for young people to think ahead in terms of their career prospects, thinking in terms of skill sets, not lifelong jobs. This, at risk of saying this is my favourite child, this is my favourite chart, and I can see by the look in all of your eyes that you share the same excitement as me. This is essentially what's been happening in the job market in Northern Ireland over the last 3 years. The bars are the level of job growth. The diamond is where that job growth would have been if it had been at the UK rate. Now, I could talk about this chart alone for 20 minutes, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. Construction and retailing dominating on the right-hand side there. That data might be revised somewhat, but essentially that's a demonstration of the domestic economy at work, beginning to get some job growth into those sectors that depend on local spending and activity. We can see education and health up there, continuing to create more jobs, but there are genuine pressures coming. Obviously, I know that well from my own sector in terms of our ability to employ more people in those predominantly public services. We can see manufacturing, despite the recent very sad news at Michelin, which obviously isn't in the data yet. The manufacturing sector has well outperformed its UK rivals. And indeed, if we look at our Irish neighbours, their export data is almost half and half between manufacturing and export and services, showing that in the corporate tax environment that we're going to move into, there should be job opportunities in the industrial sectors, which is very important given the skills base that we have. We've actually underperformed, not I may say in this part of the world, in places like ICT or professional services. So though they have been good, particularly in the professional services side, not as fast as we might have expected. Now that chart gives me some cause for concern. It means we've a lot of domestic jobs and we've a lot of public sector jobs still. Both of those are going to find it more difficult over the medium term to grow. We're going to need more of the businesses that are generating new money into the region, essentially exporters, or at least involved in the export supply chain. Our forecast for Northern Ireland, and I should say we are at the lower end of market expectations. Pretty much every forecaster from the OBR down have an economic forecasting approach that basically says the economy will grow at trend growth and it's just a matter of time as to how long it will take to get there. I think if we look at our local labour markets here, if we look at our local economy, we can see that that's clearly not the case. The economy, the market won't cure all ills. Not every problem in this city, in this region, in this area will be solved by letting the market do its thing and merely stepping aside and getting out of the way. And that makes it difficult when we think of some of our ways of appraising schemes and what we spend our money on. We focus on market failures, what's the market not doing? But maybe we want to change behaviours, maybe we want to do something slightly different with our rates policy, with our taxation policy, to encourage the behaviours that will hopefully lead to a better economic outcome in the long run. But our outlook suggests that consumer pressures, too small a private sector, or too small a tax base to be honest, and austerity will give us some constraints. Let's be clear, austerity is not as bad as was originally suggested it was going to be, and we continually present the figures to the public in cumulative real terms. There's going to be more cuts, but actually if you look at the Northern Ireland spending budget, it's from 9.7 billion to 9.9 billion. It's actually a small cash rise, but we have to keep costs down. And yes, and I'm universally unpopular in my own institution for saying this, that will have to involve difficult conversations about things like remuneration and pay. Do we really have a world in which automatic increments can stay if we know that we're going to have the same money going forward? Can we allow our cost base to rise year on year? If we do, we're going to heal less people, educate less people, serve less people. So we've got to think of ways to rise the tax base so that we maybe won't have to have those constraints on spending, or ways to control costs, or ways to do things a little bit more differently. We think we'll have manufacturing, professional services and ICT at the top of the job creation train, but you will still have job losses in public service. And of course, public service is a big absorber of graduate talent. So if you're a cup half full person, you will think that the private sector will now have access to talent during the next decade that maybe it didn't in the past, because the public sector would have crowded it out by offering opportunities at a very significant premium of salary. If, on the other hand, you're an half-empty person, the potential is we will produce graduate supply of people who perhaps are not getting the job that they thought they were. I didn't go to university for 4 years to get a £14,000 a year job, would be a common complaint, which will have detrimental effects on the next generation, on our ability to generate more people going to college if they don't think. If your job outcomes are £14,000 a year of private sector jobs as opposed to the old £25,000 a year public sector opportunities, expect people to have a diminished view of what that education investment is going to provide for them. So we really have to work on thinking about exactly what the quantum of skills is going to be, what nature, what type, and making sure that those people's expectations are lined up and that those businesses that need them can get the skills that they require. Maybe this is going to provide new skills opportunities, or maybe it's going to provide a mismatch if we're not careful. Very controversial numbers, I know, and I'm not going to spend very long talking about them, but I did want to put these numbers up. It would be remiss of an economist not to remind us of these things. We're spending £23.6 billion. You can take out this little blue bit if you really don't want to consider things like the national debt or defence at the UK level. But you've basically got your departmental spends and your annually managed, which is effectively pensions, welfare, etc. And the best estimates we have, although they may vary by some degree, are for £3 billion of VAT receipts and £2.7 billion of income tax receipts. Now, those numbers may be slightly out. It's not collected, at least in the VAT sense, in a very accurate way. But our benefit bill is about £5.7 billion. Our pensions bill is about £2.5 billion. When I look at the analysis for this area, the pensions issue and challenge is going to be one we're going to have to face quite significantly over the next 10 or 15 years. the health service at 5 billion, the education. Now, whatever else you think of those numbers, it means hard conversations are going to have to be had. We're going to have to talk about fees. We're going to have to talk about different funding mechanisms. We're going to have to talk about the level of health provision across the Northern Ireland economy. We're going to have to talk about the welfare system. And we're going to have to talk it in a very emotive and a very emotional subject, but we're going to have to at least have the conversation. And it's wonderful to be working in this city, because if I learned anything through the One Plan process, is that we've started to have those conversations. You heard about it again today. A city much better able to have those difficult conversations than many of the other councils at this point in their life cycle who haven't had city surveys, haven't had this level of engagement. But we're going to have to talk about it. If you want more jobs in this region, and you think that those people are going to come off a form of income support or living allowance or any of the other welfare funding streams, you're going to have to know that those people are going to be able to come off those, that there is the right mechanisms in place, and that you genuinely have the labour supply that you think you have. Otherwise, even if the jobs came, if they can't get the talent, they'll not come again, or they'll not stay. So we're going to have hard conversations, including how we're going to finance things. And all of the taxpayers are probably going to have to provide more. Northern Ireland spent the last decade talking about prescription charges, water charges, rates, rebates, whether that be on industrial firms, whether it be on charity shops, whether it be on post offices, agricultural buildings. We've talked about keeping our domestic rates bill down. We've talked about a lot of things that don't raise extra revenue. Some of what we're going to have to think of doing will raise extra revenue. Our business community is going to have to play a bigger role in the skills, tackling inactivity, working with people who are far from the labour market. We're going to have those connections much closer hand in glove than we've ever had before to make this work. Because saying it could be funded by somebody, not me, some other unknown taxpayer that I've never met, is going to send us the money is unlikely. But Northern Ireland has a lot of money. We have a lot of money coming in. And if we're all honest with ourselves in this room, we have to be realistic that some of it we've spent over the last 20 years hasn't been as well spent as it might be. And if this community plan is going to really have impact, we're going to have to be brave enough to talk about that too. About saying, well, of all the things we did, what wouldn't we do again? What didn't work well for us? Where did we build play parks or cycle paths that didn't work? Why didn't they work? What initiatives did we put in place that really what we learned from it was that's not the answer? Let's be big enough to have those tough conversations, because you cannot look at a set of numbers and say, we spend that much on health, that much on education, that much on welfare, that much on pensions, and we're not going to talk about how we might do those things differently or think long term about how we may change that dynamic. Conscious of my time, so I'm going to rattle through a few things for you. There is a change in the mood at the national level. We've got our Fresh Start agreement, and it was nice to see that came with confirmation of the corporate tax policy announcement. Nice to see the New York Times and others covering the Fresh Start agreement with at least a rider to say some important policy had changed. But be under no illusions that corporation tax in and of itself will change everything for everybody. It absolutely will not. And this city will have its part to play in terms of what jobs it might attract, but it will also have much more work to do in terms of the economic and social challenges. The big challenge is now. We know what the settlement is. We know from the Fresh Start negotiations that the UK Treasury may have said to us, look, you may have particular reasons why you have deprivation, why you have underperformance in some schools, but so do parts of Wales, so do parts of the northeast of England, and yours might be because of a historical legacy, and theirs might be because of closing of coal mines. But from our perspective as the taxpayer collective, we can't say to you, your issues are less valid than yours. So we've got to accept the fact that that case is harder to make. We have come out with another deal, but it's really over to us. And that means a bigger tax base in Northern Ireland going forward in order for us to do the things that we want to do. Let's remember, all these things that we want to spend money are a redistribution of income. We've got to have the income to redistribute it. That's why we need better economic performance. With my good friend Michael Gallagher and all the team and the NISRA statisticians working in ILEX who produced those packs that you had to go through, and I'm glad that you did. Fantastic that you had them and had the information, so I'm not going to talk too much about the data in it, only to say the demographic pressures are coming, and coming significantly. When we look at the deprivation or the benefit numbers and look at them as a proportion of the 16 plus population, not the 16 to 64, you can see the demonstrable impact that ageing communities are having on our economic challenge or in terms of our financial burdens. We've got a forecast for falling population in this region. You won't achieve your economic ambitions unless that's reversed. But I do remember the same forecast for Belfast many moons ago. In fact, I remember a time working for the City of London on how to reverse their declining population trajectories. So those things, whilst the outlook from NISR is that there will be a falling population, I think that's something your plan will strive to achieve or hope to change. The job numbers haven't been great in the recent data. From 2009 to 2013, it was a tough time. There are less people employed than there were, so we've got some way to go. You're one of the 11 councils, but the councils are big now. The primacy of Belfast and Derry as the big cities has been diminished somewhat by moving to 11 council model. You now have other large players making their own pitches and their own cases for what they might do in terms of economic planning. Yes, all of the areas have had falling unemployment levels. The labour market has been improving, but the inner city areas still remain the most challenging throughout Northern Ireland. Public sector dominates the labour market, we know that. Not necessarily a bad thing, as I say, well-paying and graduate, but longer term, we're going to need something else to provide the tax base. I'm conscious there's a lot of numbers here, you can't have them if you want them. One thing I would point out is that, relatively speaking, one of the obvious strengths in this area has been ICT. You can see it coming through in the data, and obviously one of our growth areas, and clearly a potential for the region. Now, final thing I want to say for you is, if the local labour market in Derry, Strabane, was to have the employment rate of the UK average, you'd have about 17,500 more jobs. Now, there's every reason to suggest that, particularly in city areas, that'd be very difficult to reach those kind of levels. But when you think of the 12,000 jobs in the one plan, who knows where our job will be to model your plans. We're not telling you the plans, we'll try to model them. But you're looking at a city and a region, the Derry, Strabane challenge of in the 10,000 kind of range to really make the demonstrable difference that you will need. Economic inactivity remains our key problem. If you plot the economic inactivity rates in 2001 versus 2011, the bottom line is they didn't change very much. And that was an era when we had quite a lot of public money. So these problems are long-term, challenging, and extraordinarily difficult to change. And it means that some of the things that we've tried in the past perhaps haven't worked. We've talked about the welfare debate, and yet, just take DLA numbers in Northern Ireland, they've risen from 180,000 to 205,000 over the last 5 years. And I have not seen any analysis in the press or anywhere else about who's joining this register, why, what are their ailments, what are their challenges, are they people that we could hope to get back into the labour market, or are they not? Are they in poor paying work? Are they elderly people claiming? We really need to understand the quantum of the people we're trying to reach and the challenges that they have to better understand what we can do to help them. 45% increase since 2000. I'm not going to talk about the individual areas today. You know very well, and they're in your packs, as to which areas have a challenge.
Time up, Neil.
Oh, darn. I really thought I was doing well, but as usual, I'm not. Earnings remain a challenge. We're going to have to increase earning levels. Skills we've talked about. I'm not going to reflect on that. Financial investment. What do I see? To wrap up, a couple of things I want to leave you with, critical challenges and opportunities. On the challenges side, yes, we've got to create jobs. But right at the start of this is, what is it that you want? That's why you have to focus on outcomes. What is it would be success for this area? It might be very different to success somewhere else. Economic inactivity and skills are probably the two intangible challenges that Northern Ireland remains. Look at the work by Boland and Murtaugh from Queen's in terms of the City of Culture evaluation. Very impactful. 80% of young people having engaged in an event, 60% or over 50 felt it made them proud of their city. But yet 2/3 of the Roman Catholic community of young people said, but where did they want to be when they were 25? Not in this city. Half of the young Protestants. Now, that's not unusual. Young people want to see the world. They want to go to Dublin, London, New York. But nevertheless, it is playing into the long-term trajectories. How are we going to get those people maybe to study here, or at least to come back in order to change what we're doing? Strengths, I can't leave you with all my challenges and problems, and even though I am over time, I am going to just labour a couple of these. Physical, I'm not, I promise, Quentin, I'll get you 1 minute. And finally, looking out of the window again, the City Hotel last night, the physical attributes, the success of the City of Culture, the fact that you put this many people in this room to have this event puts you well ahead of many of your rivals in terms of having those conversations. What if the plan doesn't come out quite the way you had hoped? Stay in the process. Building up these relationships and partnerships is key. And you do have a university. You do have a mix of sectoral performance, which is good. We will be here to help, I hope, by doing some economic modelling and maybe some more economic presentations along the way. All that's left for me to do is wish you the very best of luck with the process, and I sincerely hope that we can be of some help to you on the journey. Thank you so much.